We're very honored to have Sheherezade Alam with us for Art Moments. You probably know Art Moments is an initiative that was started in August 2011 when we felt the need to document Pakistan's art history. And what better way to do it than to invite people who had seen that history unfold. So we've had researchers, writers, artists of course, and art critics come and speak on the first 2 decades of Pakistan's art history. And of course, we've also had contemporary artists come in and discuss their own careers, their work, and the influences on their work. So it's in this series that we invite Sheherezade to come and sort of share with us her experiences. Sheherezade really needs no introduction. She is one of the most influential and important artists of her generation. She always says that, clay has been my teacher, which I think is very true, because through clay she has found her own voice and her identity. And it is clay that has helped her through, discovery of various dimensions of life, as well as helped her heal through some of the darkest moments and, emotional crisis that she saw some years ago. It helped pull her through that. And also, I think Sheherazade's art practice is very interesting because it is a very unconventional one where she is bringing art and craft together in a non-hierarchical way. And she then from that investigates the cultural continuum of our region, of our culture. So I'd like to begin by welcoming Sheherezade.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sheherezade, let's begin from the 70s. I think it was the late 60s and 70s when you were at NCA, right. And Shakir Saab was your teacher. You of course knew him as a teacher as well as later on as someone who sort of you lived with in the sense that he invited you and Zahur to live with him in his house. How did you find him? Because he's in Pakistan's art history, he has been an elusive figure. People know about him, and yet they don't know so much about him. Can you share with us your impressions?
Giving me a compliment to say that I am working hard, because usually people say you don't work hard enough, and he would say that, and he helped me hugely because being an only student in the ceramics department, and nobody to communicate with, and it would bring me to tears. And Mia Salahuddin Sahab was there, but we could talk about any other subject in the world except clay and glazes and firing, which was of course what I was looking for. It was very lonely in that sense to be in 4th year and yet not being able to communicate, not having peers that you could relate to. And it was Shakir Saab who then suggested that I go and do the rest of my thesis work at Shadara Pottery across the Ravi. That was a huge, huge experience because every day I would go drop Zahur at NCA, and then I would go to Lohari, get a van, and then endlessly go across the Ravi and get off, and then work the whole day, and then Zahur would come on a rickshaw to fetch me, and then I would come back over the Ravi. And I thought, 1 whole year of my life has passed crossing every day from the Ravi. But it's true, he was very thoughtful, Shakir Saab, to have given me that chance and ability to go and actually learn all the processes that even the college couldn't have taught me. And that started to give me an idea, because I was looking at the Finnish pattern, where there would be an artist, master designer on this side of the assembly line, and so that at the end product would be a work of art that was had multiples. It was mass produced. So my thesis was around that how is it that we can bring well-designed, thought out pieces for various functions. So that was that, but Sheherezade had the foresight, and he could see what direction to give, and that was what he passed on to all of us who had. Noor Jahan has arrived. Noor Jahan, what do you think about Sheherezade? Did he give you direction? Gee. And you know another thing, and I talk about Sheherezade, it's with awe, but I sometimes think, I was thinking about it today, and very often, that I'm much older than Sheherezade now. A whole bunch of us are older than Sheherezade. And he used to be this towering figure for all of us, and we are older than him now. And yet he's still the towering figure. We are little, you know.
I think everybody speaks about his quiet inspiration. But you know, it is also said that he gave the consciousness of modernist philosophies, introduced it in a way to the Pakistani art scene. Did you see that happen with you and Zahoor?
Well, I think that he mentored Zahoor from the very beginning. So I know that for fine arts and painting and visual arts, but because I was in clay, he was observing, but he wasn't giving me any necessary direction where to go. But the fact that he sent me to Shadara meant that he'd opened my eyes to so much that I otherwise wouldn't have known all the processes.
I think Sheherezade introduced a lot of craft. He had a reverence for craft. Yeah. So can you sort of, what do you remember of that particular
I was introduced because I lived almost a year and a half in the old principal's residence on Sanda Road, where Sir Lockwood Kipling stayed, and I'm sure Rudyard Kipling grew up in these rooms. In fact, the Royal Kipling Society arrived one day, and we had to show them around. But I observed, because he was also a collector, he collected little things that he had around him, and that exposed me to, you know, bronze and to even simple wood pieces. Of course, you know, his Swati collection, because I don't know if everybody knows, but it's worth talking about, because I think it must have been in the early 60s. Zahoor was still as a student, and Spangenberg was the principal, and it seemed that everybody, they made this field trip. At National College, the students used to go every year for a field trip, and they don't do that anymore for years and years. And the whole, I mean, a huge bunch of people would go and go by train and stop and research and talk, and then so there was a trip to Swat, and they saw so much stuff, beautiful wood carvings, these grave markers, windows, doors, and they were just lying there on the road. Nobody knew what to do with them. So they just collected, and Zahoor was witness to that, and they came back with all this Swati wood carvings, which were then later stayed in the college for a while, and then they were given to the museum. And it was a great collection. Sheherezade also kept some pieces to go every year for a field trip, and they don't do that anymore for years and years. And the whole, I mean, a huge bunch of people would go and go by train and stop and research and talk, and then so there was a trip to Swat, and they saw so much stuff, beautiful wood carvings, these grave markers, windows, doors, and they were just lying there on the road. Nobody knew what to do with them. So they just collected, and Zahoor was witness to that, and they came back with all this Swati wood carvings, which were then later stayed in the college for a while, and then they were given to the museum. And it was a great collection. Shakir Sahab also kept some pieces. I have a part of a window in my collection through Zahoor. So it's true, he made a, I mean, that whole was the first time, I think, that people went and saw what Swati wood craftsmanship was all about. And there was some wood, as some clay as well. There is a clay tradition there as well.
Coming back to your own contribution as a ceramist, you and Mia Salahuddin are responsible, really, for the contemporary, or should I call it modern ceramics in Pakistan. And you know, you've seen this whole scene evolve for the last 30 odd years. What changes do you see from the time that you graduated and today, now that whenever you teach or you jury some of the, you know, sort of graduates' work?
I find that given the conditions, I mean, NCA has, and Indus Valley here has extraordinary environment, and well, the kilns, the wheels, everything that has been set up. It's just that I find that the students, and I've been looking, I was away for some time, but when I've come back, and even on my visits from Canada, Salima would ask me to jury because January I used to be here. I found there was some wonderful work that, but with difficulty it had, and I'm sure government institutions are really known for making things difficult rather than, you know, supporting and being flexible, and that has been a real deterrent to making this craft grow. But once the students get involved, they've done some amazing work. And sadly, women, girls take up ceramics, and they're very courageous. But I've seen very few continue, even though they were doing excellent work. Even in the last 3 years, last year I was telling you there's a boy who graduated and his work was phenomenal, I thought. But you see, once they leave college, if we don't come together and start working together, share our whatever we have, there's never going to be much movement. And I don't know why sharing is so difficult, because once you've experienced this isolation and not being able to find, I mean, even now today in Lahore, I'm grappling with the idea of no gas and where do I find the right burner, and Samuel here is going to help me, and he and I believe we have to share, you know, whatever we know and come together, and ye karna padega. And somehow I can't imagine why, and since we have a new principal at NCA who's an architect and he's very open, I have a feeling, let us see if I can during their tenure, his tenure, do something that will bring the older and the younger and the ones who are coming in the future together, to give them a kind of a scope, what they could be doing. I believe that there is so much, this material is available everywhere. We just have to research it. We have to look at what suits what we are making. If you're making murals, we need this kind of clay. If it's wheel work, you need this. Firing techniques. Recently, I've just been doing pit firings because I have no gas. And I think this could all, just by working together there.
So what you're saying, that maybe we should set up workshops where resources are available to these people, you know, at a cost, of course, a nominal cost. And do you think they should be privately run, or should we have the public sector come in sort of?
Oh, definitely.
You know, like Gadi in
exactly. That's
India, which many, many years ago was set up.
I think, I don't know, but Indus Valley is now giving workshops. I don't know. I keep thinking yes.
Well, they are giving workshops, but I think anybody who wants to pursue glazing and other things seriously always runs into a a bit of a problem.
No, there should be just glaze workshops where we just do testing and clay and glaze testing, so that everybody who joins it has a little repertoire of at least clay and glazes that match. Unke paas kilns hain, test kilns hain, they have everything. And if you're outside that, if there should be a place where you could go.
I think so, because the body of work that we have seen come out has not a lot of glazing, sort of expertise. But anyway, coming back to Mia Salahuddin, you mentioned very briefly that, of course, he was your teacher, but he was not a great communicator, and of course, he was an exceptional ceramist.
Absolutely.
How did his body of work influence you, if it did in any way? What are your memories of that work?
Well, I think his work is very tactile and so different from mine. This is the great, now when I look back, and also when one is near his work, I look at mine and his, and why are there such differences. The main thing that I was really was the fluidity of clay is ever so present in his work, the immediacy of adding or subtracting or molding or leaving your mark on it or writing something on it. I mean, his repertoire. I just couldn't do it.
Spontaneous kind of working with clay.
I don't know where my aesthetics and my preferences come from, except I have also looked at a lot of pottery and forms. But for me, this sort of, we will come to that, because this symmetry on the wheel, and then can I modify it, can I change it? And I was asked, even from my first exhibition in Karachi in 1978, yes, 78. That's right. And I remember people said that everything is very symmetrical, and why don't you change it? And I tried changing, and I just couldn't. And then I thought to myself, what is holding me back? Is it, I just find that in our own particular tradition, whether it is, to me, I look at the symmetry of gardens, the Chahar Bagh, or I look at Persian or Turkish pottery, earlier pottery, right? And I always find this perfection where you are, where things are not necessarily played with or modified to leave the artist's mark on it, and without thinking, without really knowing why, I have felt that I can only find it. I modify them a little bit when they are still wet, my pieces, but after that, I modify a lot when I'm trimming. So I get the feet and the little effects around the neck and the shoulder and the lip. All these things are very carefully. I really like to leave those, but not necessarily like the American contemporary West Coast hoke pura mukha, marke.
It's an expressionist kind of extension of the expressionist movement, the clay works that came out of the West Coast. But coming back to your work, I would say that you've been a master of the hybrid form. You have combined forms very innovatively. You've borrowed from traditional vessel forms and then brought them together into and developed a new vocabulary. So, how did that inspiration start?
Well, I think really I was telling Maha the other day as well that and it became a practice with Zuhur that I really visited a lot of museums, no matter whether it was Taxila or Karachi or Lahore. And National College had this most wonderful, and that is why I think they made the Mayo School of Art next to the museum. So so people could come and look at the ancient work and then imbibe it in some way. I remember that every Friday or Saturday throughout my time at NCA, there was one full day with our sketchbooks that we went to the museum. And that is why I almost know it by heart, where if I turn left, I'll see this, and on turn right, I'll see that. And those have stayed with me. And when I was in, say, Taxila Museum, there are certain shapes that I must make in any work period, because I go back to that one piece that I saw there, or that one piece I saw then I must make it one more time, because it will obviously not be exactly, sometimes it's bigger or flatter or taller or something, but it's coming from that source. So I feel that, and then trips in Turkey and Greece, particularly the old Cretan pots. I was just so lucky to have been to these museums, and I feel for the younger people, I would highly, and now with internet, for goodness sakes, nothing, it's all available.
How does the process start of building, of creating a form? Is it on your sketchbook? Is it in the mind? And then while you're throwing or hand building? What is the process that you follow?
Well, it usually you don't know what you're going to make, but you do know that it's going to be, they're going to be bowl-like or platter-like or tall, or you know that you're feeling like doing those, and then a series will start. Of course, before I start shaping and even thinking of the shape, I have to really think of what clay I'm going to use. I'm almost thinking what would the end look like, and then work backwards. Okay, if I want, then I better use this clay, and then I'll be able to use this glaze effect. So these things are prior to actually shaping on the wheel. And then once you start, like I will go through, if I'm making platters, for example, then I know what I'm going to need, the space I'm going to be working in. That all has to be ordered before you begin. And if I'm making bottle shapes, for example, then I know that I will need this kind of clay to produce this. I've been 5 years, not all the time looking for back in Pakistan, but I haven't found a suitable clay. And after this show, I really feel that I'm going to now go and search some good clay bodies. I'm sure I need to come to Indus Valley again, or go to NCA if they will be supportive of the idea that let us just do clay and glazes as a workshop. Bring people who actually know the materials and tell them to tell us how to, because all these wonderful glaze and glaze effects recipes are available, but then we have to translate it to our own materials here and find, and then standardize that, and that will really help students to
when you say you're still looking for clay, what do you mean that you will create your own clay body? That
always.
means?
Well, in Canada I didn't have to, but here I have to create. The clay body is, as you said, like when you asked me, that is the beginning, but that material itself is going to allow you to do what you're finally wanting to.
Can you elaborate a little, because I think a lot of people here may not know what a clay body is.
Clay body is the material that you're going to, वैसे तो, like for example, if you go to a potter, कुम्हार के पास जाएं, तो you'll see the clay he is made, and you know that it's going to fire red, and you can, but then when you are looking into glazing, anything that you put on red is going to influence the color. Every glaze, now this is something that it took me years and years to find out, that here is the glaze recipe and here is the clay body. Now I can have 3 different clay bodies, use the same glaze on them, but they'll all turn out different. So you have to first match the glaze to the clay body and say, yes, this is going to give me results. I found some wonderful glazes in Canada, because I had to change my whole palette, because in the building and in my workshop where I worked, I could only use electric kilns. And for 20 years, I had only used gas here. And So to change that but then I had these incredible clays like porcelain, mid-fire, high-fire, black porcelain, back clay, stoneware, so all these. So I would find a glaze and then I would use it on and forget that the other clay that I'm going to use the same glaze on would be just totally different. So then understanding that and then fixing that yes, only this effect will come on this clay. It takes a little time.
So what you're saying is that you have to keep working, keep experimenting. And I think that is maybe a problem that ceramists today are facing here in Pakistan. They don't have the facilities, they're not very prolific. So eventually the work never really, moves.
Takes off.
And gets more refined or more experimental. Color's been, the glaze palette has been important for you. You worked with turquoise while you were at Yale.
Yes.
In order to connect to the Islamic ceramics. And now we see this white work coming out of your studio. How did that come about? And with all those bands, the polychrome bands.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting journey because you try and work at something that you want to discover. So you see the ancient Chinese glazes, for example, was a period I went to on the British Council Scholarship 83, 84, and I spent 3 months only doing testing on clays and glazes and discovered how to, and then firing alongside. You have to fire alongside in order to get the results. So, and it never occurred to me that our own tradition is unglazed except for the tile work. And we don't have, and so it was very difficult to, but again, how could I not know how to make a turquoise, for example? So when I went to Yale, we were there for 2 years, that's one color I wanted to make more of, to know completely that, yes, I can make a turquoise glaze. But before I had left in the mid-80s, I had tried to make a lot of those ancient Chinese glazes, the temuku, the chun, the copper reds, and that comes from just having learnt and then experimenting in my present kiln in Lahore. And it was amazing, but it takes like a couple of years before you start actually producing ware that you are actually, where you started, let's say, yes. So these, once I'd done that, then I was doing a lot of, of course, when I went to Toronto, I tried to do the turquoise again to see if I can make it in the clays there. And electrically, you can fire turquoise. And it became more green than turquoisey. And after a while, I stopped. I said, I'll have to get that clay that I'd used in New Haven, and I even called, okay, would you send it? And I said, all right, let's leave the turquoise on one side, let's not go into it, and let me. Then I had this period where I was finding this beautiful porcelain, not high-fi to 1250, but around 1180 or something like that. And I could go very fine. And then I had this sort of this, it was called a crackle glaze, which did some amazing things. It would drip and pool. You have one of those pieces and then have crackle. So then for almost a year, I just work on that crackle glaze. Sometimes it takes a good part of the year to just settle with what you began with after testing, and then you start a body of work. Where you then use that glaze. So you start with small things. First I make diyas because they take the least space in the kiln, and then diyo ke baad chote bowls, then go into tea bowls, and then into little bottles. But for that crackle glaze, it had to be a container-like. Another thing, another direction my work took was I had spoiled so many pieces if I used the same glaze inside and outside. And all my pieces would melt, the glaze would melt and get stuck on the shelf, and I destroyed the shelf plus the pot. So I just, at one point, decided no pot will have what is inside outside. So Then I found this bronze slip that I started using outside and till the edge. And then it became a style. I just couldn't ever put the same glaze outside. And then the outside should look different from the inside. These were little things that I enjoyed doing.
But how did the white come about? Because I think that's very unusual, the matte white that you use. It's almost like an astar. Like globe,
No, and it is the clay itself. The thing was that it's so interesting because why didn't I think that we don't have a glaze tradition? Why am I working so hard? I think only because you must go through that process of knowing at least whether you practice it forever or not. Then, just strange that 2006, my show called Reemergence, I started to feel that why don't I make pots where people can actually touch the clay when they hold the pot, instead of the glaze actually is a skin over the clay. So you never see the clay, you never feel the clay, you never touch the clay. And then you also have to fire it to its maximum point, so it gets so fused that it becomes stone-like. And you can do a tongue test to see if this is sticking or not, because if it's fully fired, it's non-porous and it becomes stone. And then it's really started with this black stoneware that I found at the pottery supply house. And so then that was the black series that came out, and I loved that chocolate brown. And then I found another clay that had some fleck in it. But then I added more materials that would not color it, but stay like the little fleck one. And if I high fired it, sometimes if they were big, manganese actually is this material that, and I got some really interesting results from that. And that's why then, and I had no idea I was coming back to Pakistan at that time. And I thought, look, I've started going back to the non-glaze tradition just before I'm going back to Pakistan. And this was also to test out all the clays that I could leave bare, and they were still very interesting. I had gone somewhere camping, and I found a lot of mica in the forest. It was just there, I don't know how. So then I brought that mica back and then mixed it with, but at high temperature it would burn out. It didn't have that nice fleck, but if I kept it at lower, then it was fine.
It works well with terracotta.
Yes. So one thing leads to another, and mostly an accident leads you to something very key.
You know, when we met in the early 90s, I remember you talking about Bernard Leach with great reverence. And now, after this long journey, how do you look back at that period, that tremendous influence that he had on you in terms of his philosophy and also his practice?
Well, he even before I went to England, so I can even talk of the early 80s, when I was searching for direction and what I should do, and Bernard Leach and Shoji Hamada and the unknown craftsman, all these were very great influences for me. Bernard Leach gave me, as you said, the philosophy and the tenacity to stick to he used to call it the nobility of the pot, meaning not in other name, but just that it should be its own person and be very noble in it. So I picked up a lot of, then I met the Leach family, and I was very lucky to have to share with them but you really, eventually you really grow on your own. You can think of Shoji Hamada again as the towering figure, and Bernard Leach and Henry Hammond and all these people. But then you keep moving and finding yourself. There was a very interesting, I think 14, 15 years after I had been on my British Council scholarship, I went back to one of the potteries I'd worked with, Clive Bowen, a very, very high quality slipware, which is early Roman, British slipware. He's a master, and he even does these bottleneck kilns, firings. Then I was sitting there talking to Clive, and I said, I've been trying to make that ultimate tea bowl. And he said, whatever you make will be actually a Sheherezade tea bowl. It will never be a Japanese tea bowl. He said, I have brought all the best brushes to have the stroke of the Japanese sumie brush stroke. But my brush strokes are always Clive-born brush strokes.
That's very true. You know, you've also worked with potters. Sufi Ji was one a person who collaborated in your studio.
Very good, yes.
And what did that sort of teach you in terms of, you know, what, how do you think was that experience? When I say teach, I mean that whenever you collaborate, obviously it leaves behind some sort of resonance.
Oh, it was a seminal experience, because I think working with a potter whose ancestry was pottery as well, words, even poetry that he would recite while he was making something, or giving me Baba Bulle Shah ki koi pad diya. I hadn't had that. I mean, you go to college and you read Bernard Leach and, you know, The Unknown Craftsman, which I'm working with The Unknown Craftsman. And so I think I had about 18 months with Sufi Ji, where we didn't talk how to make the best clay or the best glaze, or it wasn't on that level, but it rooted me through tradition, how to look. And always, I mean, he would say things like कि जी मिट्टी नाल काम करना है तो मिट्टी बनना पड़ेगा. तो अब वो पहले तो सुन लिया, then you start believing that yes, you have to become clay before you understand clay. He through his words and his wisdom, which is it's only an oral wisdom through poetry and Sufi poetry in particular, that sort of connects you to the ancient and to tradition in a way that colleges don't, and to spirituality as well. I mean, my reverence for Baba Bulle Shah, for example, comes through Sufi Ji's time, because I felt that, okay, I must name one Baba as my spiritual mentor. So I thought, why not Baba Bulle Shah? So I would go with my celebration bowls and leave them there. I don't know for how long they'd last, but it was such a pleasure that I'm carrying this pot from Lahore to Kasur, and I'm going to place it. And he's my spiritual mentor for pottery. I mean, there may be others for others, but that was really to connect. It's really, really important when you're working with clay and such a tradition, that you connect with the earth, with the land, with what went before, and great respect for the great matka makers and their incredible skill. And one thing I've felt very strongly about, especially after my stint in Multan, where I was trying that maybe the art college in Multan should also have a good ceramics department, but sadly again it's a government institution. It's just that we don't need foreign, faculty to come and work. We just need our own great skill base that we have, and our students should really start there.
You know, I agree with you there, but then I think a lot has to do with attitudes and your own consciousness about this legacy that you talk about. And you know, the tragedy of Zahoor and Jahanara, I think, was devastating for you, and I think for a lot of us who knew both of them. And so after that, you left your practice for quite some time, and then sort of began to consolidate their legacy. And you took certain initiatives, you formed Lalal, then you have published 2 books on Zahoor, and of course now more recently set up Jahan-e-Jahanara. Can you tell us about all those experiences?
Well, it was extraordinary to have experienced that moment, and let's say after that. But I don't know what gave me the strength. I know that enormous amount of strength came at that time. But whenever I thought of clay, I mean, I don't mind talking about it because somebody might also understand this, that fear of burial just wasn't there, because I was giving them back to the earth, Mother Earth, and that's where we've come from. We are partly earth, and that's where we go back. And it seemed like it seemed natural almost, that's what you do when the body remains and the spirit leaves. Then the next was that when I went back to Toronto, how do I go back and start making pots was quite strange. I was not really connected to myself in some way. I was still healing, I guess. And so I did go to the studio. I had a commitment. I had a show in July of '99, and I thought, how am I going to go public suddenly in 6 months? And but I knew I had a body of work that I was going to show, and it took a lot of courage to again stand publicly and show my work. It's really, really hard. And I know I haven't talked about it, and they're not in this show, but I don't know why I did it. But I made a whole series called the Mother and Child bowls. And it was very sweet because they were bowls that had a smaller version that sat inside it. So I thought there was a great relief for me just to do that work in between July mein tha, to May and June mein. But after I had done that show in July, I felt, okay, I have to look at other things. And what am I knew I had to do a book on Zahoor, and where do I start, what do I do? And then a series of things happen that initiate and then continue. Then maybe a year passed. I didn't stop teaching. That seemed even in my studio in Toronto, I kept teaching. But to go and what do I do, what do I make, where do I start, just wouldn't come. And but something told me that, clay has told me that, you put me on the back burner, what you know about me, and whatever skill you have, you'll come back to that. But if there are other things, don't feel guilty about leaving clay, because here's a ready studio, everything there, and I'm never getting there. It was really hurt that I was not continuing, and so I didn't do for 5 years. I didn't really go back and make anything. And in the meantime, the book got published, the book launches happened, the big exhibition in Toronto with the takhtis included. Having done all that, and I remember when I looked literally like at the time factor, almost 5 years had passed, and it seemed in those 5 years a lot had happened that now I could go back. And so what were the first pots I wanted to make? And I don't know why the idea of the kashkol, the offering bowl, came to me that I should just to get back to my practice. And it's very similar to the dahi ka kunda, jo chota wala hota hai, the shallow. And so every day I would just go and make those. I had no idea what I would be doing with them. And then a very extraordinary thing happened in September. There was this horrible massacre of children in Russia that affected me hugely. And I talked to Gulzar Sahab, the architect, Gulzar Haider. Okay, I'm really feeling this a lot, of this senselessness of what's happened. And our whole neighborhood, the children in the school, everybody knew about it, but there was no way of communicating how horrible this had been for everybody in the community, just this news. So he said, why don't you go back to your studio and make 150 the number of children that were reported killed, and why don't you just go and make those bowls and go into the public, into a garden, and have a ritual, invite the whole community, your neighborhood, and do a ritual around this for the whole. So, you know, the next morning I went and I'd started glazing them. I'd started putting red in them because this is a glaze that I'd found that I thought is very nice. So and I started on this big table, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3. And you know, I was just crying all the time, thinking, ke kitne niklenge? I mean, wo jahan rakhe hue the idhar udhar that I had made. And by the time I'd covered 2 tables with my offering bowls, they were about 150 or 40 or something like that. And I called the local school, which is across the road, and I said to the principal, can you come over immediately? And he said, what's the matter? I said, something very important. So therein begins the Lali series, because I got it over, and then on Remembrance Day, 11/11/11, which is a very key, I did a huge ritual with the school, with these. We made Remembrance Day cards, the children got involved, the community got involved, wrote letters, remembered their loved ones. And it was just, I can't tell you what an extraordinary moment on 11/11, exactly on the 11th of November at 11 o'clock. And I had taped bird sounds, and that's all that we heard. And it was just this 3-minute, and then the children walked around my installation and went back. And then some people said, you know, this is the first spiritual experience school children have had. And I think that starts the Lali series. Then I'm very geared to make more red. Then I start making the bigger bowls. And then and then I felt more and more that I was doing what was supposed to happen. And then the reds came, and then many exhibitions later. But I had, for example, when the school ritual finished, somebody said, why don't you do this in our own building? So all the pots came back into our building, and I had a great ritual. It was called In Silence and Light. And everybody put tea lights in these red bowls and remembered their loved ones. It was amazing how we all came together, and it felt, people came and wrote things, and then I felt, yes, something really special has happened. And there was the beginning of me coming back to clay.
And also Jahane Jahanara. I think that's also been a very important initiative for you. Can you talk about that a little and tell us how it's shaping up and what is it about?
Well, a trip to Delhi and going to Sanskriti outside Delhi, I was just charmed by the idea of having open air museum, terracotta museum, and bringing children to show them. And one thing led to another. Kamil Sahab and Taimur designed this under a tree. One thing after another thing started to happen, but then the whole idea that this would be Jahane Jahanara it came, I guess in 2010, once the building was, how is it going to be organized? How am I going to get children? What am I going to teach? What is it going to be? And the name, somebody, just when I was at the initial period, I didn't know I was going to call it center or something like that, give it some name. And this young person had come after a Farsi class, and so he said, and he's a dancer, and he said, have you thought of Jahane, the way he said Jahane Jahanara? And I said, wow. So I wrote it down, and and he knew Jahanara as well. So of course I always have to go to the elders and check it out. Is this all right? Am I being precocious or something? And then I was given the go-ahead, and so the name came, and then Center for Traditional Arts, so that, and it was just fascinating that on the Mall Road, Jahane Jahanara is 90 Upper Mall, and just near Tollington Market, where Crow Eaters used to be, Kamil Saab's son Taimur started a center for traditional arts called Hastonis. And I mean, they knew that I was, but I didn't know when my Bismillah was going to be. But then I decided October 3rd or something, 2010. And I realized Hastonis was opening the same day, and it's a center for traditional arts for older people, and I was starting my Little for the Little People. And these are the two, and where our directions and philosophies are going, it's another matter, but I did believe that I wanted to teach children more about tarbiyat and our inheritance, so it had to go towards traditional arts. And let's see, so far we've had Nahid teaching Kathak, Nahid Siddiqui, who came, and I can't tell you how I felt that day. Ke darakton ke niche, these beautiful girls, chote, red churidars and whatever, and they're dancing. And I'm thinking, my God, what a wonderful moment. And these little Kathaknis, as I call them, it was so lovely. I have it on Facebook, but it was just like, how did this happen? But it was really lovely.
I think it's the desire to bring change that these things happen. But you know, Sheherezade, we've talked, now for an hour. And of course, I'd love to keep on talking, but I'm sure there are a lot of questions that the audience would like to ask. How would you like your legacy to be remembered? Do you think about it? You see, we, in our culture, don't always think about our own legacy. We are quite busy trying to, sort of just go through the mundane, everyday work. But I think if you have ever thought about it, I would like to share with us. Because I think being in the field for 30 years, one sort of has achieved tremendous success here and in other countries. How do you think about it?
Well, I don't even see it as a legacy. If I have made something of beauty and it's going to be left behind, then maybe I've done something worthwhile. But it is very special for me that at least I tried to bring my aesthetics from my learnings and from my experiences, huge experiences that I've been lucky to have, travel experiences as well. That my idea of aesthetics and beauty and where it's coming from and how does that happen. But I've always felt, and I even think little gestures that our little catalog for the Koel show, I think very few people will actually see those spots or experience the show. But this little catalog is a thing of beauty, which is going to go everywhere. Or wherever, as many as were printed will somehow reach somewhere. And I feel that bringing something beautiful that you're really happy with and charmed by as well. So that, I think, is something that I feel that if I've done that, then all is well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, but it's been a tremendous experience talking to you. And now I'm sure there are some questions that the audience would like to ask.
I just wanted to say, when you were talking about the little
Kathak, yes.
When you took me to Jahana and Jahara, there was, you remember that little girl?
Yes.
Sitting, she must be about, 6, 7 years old?
7.
So you are also having these kumharnis there. And because I think it's all coming together, and it is a lovely space.
It is. Thank you. Yes, it is available. You can go on Facebook.
I just want to thank you again for taking me there. And it was lovely.
And my little terracotta museum, that is all the ghada, matkas, whatever I find. I asked Mr. Ahmed Javed कि ये terracotta museum जो है इसका उर्दू में अच्छा सा नाम बताएं. तो उन्होंने कहा इसको आप रखिए, इसका नाम इतनी अच्छी उर्दू बोलते हैं कि वो उन्हीं से पूछना चाहिए. तो उन्होंने कि उसको लिखें खाना-ए आब-ओ-गिल, क्योंकि मौलाना रूमी ने हमारे बॉडीज़ को कहा था कि खाना-ए आब-ओ-गिल, तो वो अब लिखा हुआ है वहाँ पे खाना-ए आब-ओ-गिल.
Just one more question. This exhibition at Koel, all the pots, I mean, there are quite a few. It's a huge body of work. So, and you were saying the other day that it was all done in Canada.
Most of it.
Most of it, okay. So, what is the what year, which year, and for or how many years work is it?
Well, starting in '93, because I was so lucky to go to a building where I stayed for all my time that I spent there, with the studio downstairs and me living upstairs. That sorry, what was your question again? That so 93 we arrived, 94 I started working, teaching. And then already by 96, I had my show at the Gardner Museum. So it just goes on. I mean, I feel that this was a great period of time that I got, 94 to 99. Only 5 years, is it?
It's a prolific period.
Yes.
Prolific one, yes.
And अभी आपने जो मेरा जो 98 में जो मैं काम कर रही थी, which I think is a very, very extraordinary time that I was working, and I have those pots are still in Toronto. I hope to have a retrospective with my early Lahore series, plus what I did in England. Because I have kept those pots, and I would like to enlarge this and then also get the ones from Toronto. I wasn't confident to send them in the container because I thought, okay, what if the container gets lost?
One can imagine. Already one of your cartons has got lost while coming from Lahore to Karachi, so one can imagine.
Yeah, so somehow I thought not these ones, they can't get lost, so inshallah.
Young lady here.
I have basically two questions. पहले तो मैं आपसे सिर्फ ये पूछना चाहती हूँ कि क्या पोइट्री में हम लोग empirical word, the things which we can't touch, उस पर काम कर सकते हैं, और आपने क्या उस पर काम किया है, जैसे सोल है या ईमान है, इस तरह के टॉपिक्स जो है. दूसरा मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि जो न्यू लर्नर्स हैं, उसको आप क्या सजेशन देना चाहते हैं इस फील्ड में, पोइट्री के फील्ड में?
देखिए, सबसे पहले जब पॉटरी या मिट्टी में हाथ डालते हैं ना, तो आपकी पूरी जो वजूद है ना, उसको कुछ पता चलता है, कोई नई चीज़ हो रही है. It's a rare feeling that your whole body experiences that you've touched something. Now and even my 7-year-olds, when and I want them to believe what I'm saying, because they at 7 and 10 believe what I'm saying. And if I say कि कैसा लग रहा है, आप मुझे बताइए, या अगर आप नहीं छुएंगे तो मट्टी को कुछ भी नहीं होगा, आप छुएंगे. So they are learning step by step that by doing you experience something. And I firmly believe that through earth, fire, water, air, as we should learn pottery through, it is the first time children really connect to their spiritual selves, which is their soul, which is the intangible, as you were saying. And even like, for example, just to tell you this feeling that these ancient mehergar pots, because they are now in the market and you can actually, otherwise you can't go to a museum and touch pieces. But वो लोगों के घरों में जब मिलते हैं मुझे ये pieces, which are like 6,000 years old, 4 at least, and something happens. So it is contained, that activity of the maker and the material itself is recorded and embedded. That's one. आप कह रही थी, how do you do that? And you are continuously going into the unknown when you're working with clay and then with fire and with these materials. पानी ज़्यादा हो गया, आग ज़्यादा हो गई. So the balancing of that makes you very alert as to what you are doing. And in that attentiveness, you learn a lot. इस तरह के आपने कुछ जवाब चाह रही थी आप. मैं तो कहती हूँ कोई pot बन ही नहीं सकता without your, the soul. But you're saying how to show soul. I think through beauty. If it's something exquisite to look at, something
symbolic language, actually.
Symbolic
language. You cannot show the image because obviously it's an intangible, as you said. But all these things actually are embodied, in the work, or the work embodies it. Any other questions?
Charity, is it okay now?
I think so.
No, I was just asking that this long journey of evolving and experiencing and happening, of course, there's always this point where you stop, step back, and be critical of your own work, and then you move on. Now, with this major exhibition of, after a gap, and I think it's fantastic. What are the feelings that you experienced seeing all the work together? As to, has something started happening as to where your direction is going to be? Is there going to be a change completely, or do you feel that now has something already happened? It starts germinating into some direction, or not really?
Well, more and more, it seems to me, having looked at this body or whatever I've done, I just feel that the public, as well as children in particular, I am going to become this, spokesman for the Indus Valley civilization, and I have already, because I have this Harappan Gharonda with all the Harappan pieces. All my work with children is very much with the Harappan shapes, and I talk Harappa because it's closest to Lahore, and we have Mehergarh, which we need to document more and more of. I have a feeling, if you are asking me if it's going to take any direction, it should now. I'm going to now rediscover the Indus Valley, I think. And some of my favorite shapes exist within, but how to look into it, do a whole series that I think and particularly make it that. I have a feeling I would like to do that, even if I just do miniatures and just start.
Is it a certain scale? Are you thinking big? Are you thinking small? Are you going back into like this?
Like when I think if I was to work with young people at college or NCA, I would certainly go into big sizes with their big kilns and 3 or 4 people working on one piece, collaborative pieces. And then I think really big, because my kiln is fairly small, but I can get about this big a piece in my kiln. So it's things like that I think, or then I go into miniature and see if I can do just a series. देर हो रही है ना सबको घर जाना. No, I do have a sketchbook where I, a pot has body parts like we do. So for example, there's a base or a foot of a pot, for example, and then there's the belly, and then there's a shoulder, and then there's a neck, and then there's a lip. So I keep, in my sketchbook, I keep stretching them in different directions. Like if the foot is big, then where will it go and what will it end up like that? So I do sketch that. But when I sit on the wheel, you just start. You just start and but you know that you are making bowls or platters or bottles.
That's what I wanted to ask. Is it directly from your imagination to the clay, or is there a lot of technicalities involved? Like you sketch and you figure out how it's going to come?
No.
Any more questions? Because then we have to wrap up. The city is not very restful at the moment.
I have a question regarding the basic clay which you get to. Is it from the riverbed, or do you mix some things in it?
For my clay classes with children, I usually just go to the potters and get their clay because it's already been made. But for my own throwing on the wheel work, it's very important to have a very good clay that will stretch itself in many directions. Sometimes if your clay hasn't got that quality, you'll take it up to a certain point and it'll flop down. So for making things on the wheel, you have to have, and that's the clay that I have to now. In Canada, it was a phone call away, so now I have to really relook at making. आप पूछ रही थी what goes into clay? There are different kinds of, for example, basically if you want a white body, clay body, then you would use, for example, you would use white pottery clay, then you'll strengthen it with something else, and 2 or 3 materials together will make your clay body.
So there are different ingredients which go into the clay, but my question was, where do you get the raw material, like from the riverbed? Is it silty?
Yes. Where do the potters get it from? It has to be where water has, the best clay sits where, around canals. I'm not sure Samuel would be able to tell you, यहाँ तो मट्टी ज़्यादा नहीं मिलती, कहाँ से?
We use chemical bazaar to get materials, basically like rocks and all those things.
Yes.
Glass and thread and all that. ताकि उसकी processing बढ़ाने के लिए उसे use करते हैं. यहाँ मिलती है सामान. You have to search out.
हाँ.
बस वो what is it? आपको पता होना चाहिए.
From what I remember, कुम्हारों से
you have to almost remember clay comes from some mother mountain. वहाँ पे stone, then erosion, falling into the water, rolling down, getting crushed, and by the time it levels out on flatter soil, that's where all clays come from.
We go on these outdoor trips, and once we had a young potter with us, perhaps you know Sheherezade, and she collected a whole lot of silt from the riverbed.
Yes.
And she raised about it.
Yes.
It's very pliable. And
Yes.
she, of course, she adds some minerals to it.
Mm.
For color, but that's a pure.
But it still needs to be dried. First, it's dry. If it's wet, it has to be dried. Then it has to be made into slip, and then it has to be chano. Matlab, it has to be sieved.
Yes.
Then, and then also you have to age clay, because the older the clay, the better it performs.
So there's a whole science of making.
Yes. For example, now I'm using. And I also asked Nawaz Bhai from Harappa. He makes his Harappan clay, it's dug from there. So I have this pleasure of knowing that I'm using Harappan clay.
Right. That's more for the rigid pieces, which doesn't need a lot of pliability.
No, very good. वो जो नवाज भाई के pots हैं, they're this big.
I see.
It's a very malleable clay.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I think, any more questions? Acha, haan.
Assalamualaikum.
Salam.
I just wanted to ask a few of your pieces that were exhibited had this very raw feel to it. They weren't
what?
glazed.
Very-
They had a really raw feel to them.
हाँ.
They weren't glazed actually.
Right.
So I just wanted to ask कि आपकी clay जो होती है उसी as in glazing के बगैर do you add materials to it which give the color? Because fire clay जो आपने use की हुई थी या stoneware जो use की हुई थी, even that was उसका एक brown, deep brown सा color था.
Right.
So did you added something in that clay body?
This was a ready-made clay available in Canada where I was working at that time, but you can add lots of colorants. You can add many minerals, as you said, to clay to alter the color as well as the texture. You can, एक material होता है grog, which is old, which is fired pottery that's crushed back into a kind of a sandy. So grog se bhi you can add manganese to and get some really nice effect, but you have to take the firing higher.
I think even sand, हमारे जो कुम्हार हैं, they use fine sand as well, as we know. Thank you very much, Sheherezade,
Thank you, Nilofer.
taking out time. I know you're headed for back to Lahore on Sunday, but thank you for
Inshallah.
taking our time, and
Thank
good
you.
luck. with whatever of the show is left. Another day, I think, or you're wrapping up tomorrow?
Tomorrow, yes.
So if you haven't been to see the show, please do. And it's at Koel. And thank you very much for all of you for coming.
Thank you so much.